My dad said I was the dumb one, and he told me he was going to make sure I stayed that way. In my family, my father assigned each of his children an identity, almost from the moment we were born. Not a nickname, not a joke, an identity. A role we were supposed to live inside forever. Nolan was the smart one, Adrian was the handsome one, Mara was the strong one, and I was the dumb one. Dad did not just label us and move on. He treated those labels like laws. If we showed any talent, ability, or strength that did not match the role he had given us, he punished us for it. He called it maintaining the family ecosystem, like we were not children, but parts of some machine he had designed. He made those assignments within minutes of our births, based on whatever first impression he decided mattered. Nolan came out quiet and watchful, so Dad declared him the smart one. Adrian had delicate features even as a newborn, so Dad decided he was the handsome one. Mara was a big baby who cried loud and hard, so Dad named her the strong one. I was born last. I was the smallest. I struggled to breathe. Dad decided that meant I was dumb. He treated those roles like medical conditions. He even wrote them on our birth certificates as if they were official diagnoses. Mom left when she realized he was not exaggerating, and that he truly meant to raise us that way. She could not stand watching what he was doing to us, but Dad took her leaving as proof that his system worked better without her. When Nolan struggled with a math problem, Dad would sit beside him, solve it for him, and talk about how a brilliant mind sometimes needed guidance. But if I tried to help Nolan with anything, Dad beat me, because dumb children did not understand mathematics. When I grew taller than Adrian, Dad forced me to hunch constantly, day after day, until my spine actually started to curve, because the dumb one could not also be tall. He pulled me out of school after 3rd grade and told people I was too stupid to learn. But the real reason was that he panicked when I started reading above grade level. Mara was not allowed to cry, not even when she broke bones, because the strong one did not feel pain. Adrian gained normal teenage weight, and Dad put him on extreme diets until he fainted, because the handsome one had to stay lean no matter what. Dad got worse as we got older, because we started becoming real people instead of the categories he had trapped us in. We started showing talents that did not match the labels he had chosen for us, and he treated that like betrayal. When Adrian showed athletic talent, Dad fed him pills that made his hair fall out, because handsome boys were not supposed to bulk up. When Mara was only 6 years old, he forced her to lift weights until her joints were damaged so badly that she would need a cane by the time she was 20. When Nolan showed artistic talent, Dad burned his paintings right in front of him. But I got the worst of it, because intelligence was harder to destroy than looks or strength. Dad made me take pills that left me dizzy, foggy, and confused. He told everyone they were medication for my severe learning disability, a disability I did not actually have. My siblings and I tried to protect each other inside that nightmare. Nolan secretly taught me from his textbooks after midnight, risking Dad's rage if we got caught. Adrian stole my pills whenever he could, and switched them with vitamins. Mara would pretend to chase me away from her weights, but she was really helping me exercise when Dad was not watching. We created a secret language so we could communicate without Dad noticing. We were prisoners together, each of us trapped inside our assigned curse, each of us trying to help the others survive theirs. Our first real escape attempt happened when I was 15. Mara had saved money from odd jobs, and we planned to run away together. We almost made it, but Dad had put trackers in our phones, and he caught us at the train station. His punishment was brutal. Mara had to carry 100-pound bags everywhere until her back gave out. Nolan had to solve equations for 16 hours straight until he collapsed. Adrian had to stand in front of mirrors for days, listing every flaw in his face and body. I had to write, "I am too stupid to think for myself," 10,000 times. After that, Dad moved us to an isolated farmhouse and told everyone we had died in a fire. 3 years later, I found online courses and started secretly studying. While Dad thought I was looking at picture books, my siblings created elaborate distractions so I could learn. Nolan would fake academic crises that demanded Dad's full attention. Adrian would have grooming emergencies that took hours to fix. Mara would pretend to hurt herself in ways that required constant care. Because of them, I finished my GED. Then I applied to colleges using the library computer. When my acceptance letter from State University arrived at our P.O. box, Mara grabbed it first. We all cried together in the barn. We planned my escape for months. The night I left, Nolan faked a seizure from overtaxing his brilliant mind, while Adrian smashed a mirror and threatened to destroy his own face. During the chaos, Mara smuggled me out in her truck and drove me to campus. For one amazing week, I lived in a dorm and went to classes like a normal person. I picked my own clothes. I talked in class. I made friends who knew me as just me. Then Dad called. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" he said, strangely calm. "The school called about your medical records. I've already withdrawn you. Mara is bringing you home." I turned around, and Mara was standing in my doorway, looking sick with guilt. Behind her stood Dad, holding a medical bag. "I'm sorry," Mara whispered. "He threatened to blind Adrian and break Nolan's hands." Dad smiled while he prepared a syringe. "You've upset the whole ecosystem by trying to be smart," he said, walking toward me. "We need to fix that overactive brain permanently. Dr. Halloran is meeting us at the house. He does special procedures that target specific parts of the brain." Mara grabbed my arms. Dad raised the needle. Then he said the words that still haunt me. "Don't worry, son. You won't even remember wanting to be anything but dumb once we're done scooping out the problem areas." The needle moved toward my skin. I could see the clear liquid inside the syringe. Mara's grip tightened around both my arms. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might tear itself apart. The metal point touched my arm. Then someone started banging on my dorm door, hard enough to shake the frame. Dad jerked the needle back and shoved it into his medical bag right as the door flew open. Campus security officer Dominic Reyes rushed in with one hand on his radio, staring at the three of us frozen in place. Mara still had my arms pinned behind me. Dad was zipping his bag closed, trying to look normal. Officer Reyes stepped between us and pulled Mara's hands off me. Then he moved me behind him toward the door. My whole body was shaking so badly I could barely stand. My teeth chattered like I was freezing. Dad immediately started talking in his calm doctor voice, telling Reyes how worried he was about my mental health and how badly I needed help. He said I had been having episodes and making up stories about the family. Reyes looked at the red marks on my arms where Mara had grabbed me. Then he looked at Dad's medical bag sitting on my desk. I tried to talk, but my voice came out broken from the shaking. Reyes asked me what was in the bag, and I managed to say the word syringe between chatters. Dad said it was only medication for my condition. Reyes did not believe him. He called for backup on his radio and stood in the doorway so nobody could leave. Dad tried to push past him, but Reyes put up his hand and said everyone needed to stay where they were until this got sorted out. 2 more security guards arrived. Reyes told them to watch Dad and Mara while he talked to me. I told him about the needle. I told him about the lobotomy Dad had threatened. The words spilled out of me in a panic, mixed up and shaking. Reyes's face changed from concern to horror. He called for an ambulance. Dad kept trying to interrupt and explain, but Reyes told him to be quiet. The ambulance arrived after what felt like forever, even though it was probably only 10 minutes. The EMTs checked me over and found the tiny red mark where the needle had touched my skin. They loaded me into the ambulance while Reyes told Dad and Mara they needed to come to the station for questioning. At the emergency room, Dr. Yusuf Adeyemi examined the injection site and took pictures of it with a special camera. He measured the red marks on my arms and documented everything in his computer. Then he ordered blood tests immediately to see if any drugs had entered my system. The nurse drew what felt like 20 tubes of blood, while Dr. Adeyemi asked me what had happened. I told him about the pills Dad had forced me to take for years. I told him they made me dizzy and confused. I told him about the fake learning disability. Dr. Adeyemi's face grew more worried with every answer. He ordered more tests, including hair samples that could show drug exposure going back months. The nurse cut small pieces of hair from different places on my head and sealed them in evidence bags. They made me give a urine sample too. They swabbed the inside of my mouth. Dr. Adeyemi said they were going to run every test possible to find out what Dad had been giving me. I spent the whole night in the hospital getting tests and scans. They did a brain scan to check for any damage from the long-term drugging. The next morning, a woman named Marisol Quinn from the university came to see me. She introduced herself as a case manager and sat beside my bed with a thick folder of papers. She explained that the registrar's office had found the documents Dad used to withdraw me from school. The papers claimed I had severe cognitive impairment and could not function in an academic setting. Marisol said the documents were clearly forged because I had been attending classes just fine for a week. She helped me fill out something called a privacy block so Dad could no longer access any of my school records. We spent an hour going through forms for campus safety measures. Marisol started the paperwork for a no-contact order that would ban Dad from campus. She said it would take a few days to process, but campus security already had Dad's picture. I used my phone to text my siblings our old code word, the one that meant, "Are you okay?" Adrian texted back that Dad was home and screaming at everyone about how I had ruined everything. Dad was on the phone with lawyers, trying to file for guardianship over me. He was claiming I was mentally incompetent and needed someone to make decisions for me. Adrian warned me that Dad had already called 3 different doctors, trying to get them to sign papers about my supposed disability. There was something deeply unsettling about how methodical Dad was. He had built an entire control system around roles he assigned us at birth based on first impressions. He was so committed to those categories that he had drugged his own children, broken our bodies, warped our lives, and still believed he was the reasonable one. Marisol called someone from legal aid, and within an hour, an attorney named Priya Anand arrived. She was young, but sharp. She took notes on everything I told her, and said we needed to document every single detail if we were going to fight Dad's guardianship attempt. She had me write down everything I could remember about the pills and the abuse. We made lists of every time Dad had hurt us for being good at the wrong things. Priya said my college acceptance and grades would help prove I was not mentally impaired. Detective Renee Salas came that afternoon to take my official statement about what happened in the dorm. She had me go through everything step by step while she recorded it on a small device. She asked about the long-term pattern of abuse, so I told her about the roles Dad assigned us. She asked if I had any proof of what Dad had been doing. That was when I remembered the birth certificates Mara had mentioned once, the ones where Dad had written our assigned roles. Detective Salas wrote it down and said she would look into getting copies from the county records office. I spent the next 2 days going through everything I had. I pulled together my GED certificate from the folder I had hidden in the barn. I printed my college acceptance letter at the library computer. I took screenshots of every text message my siblings had sent me over the years about what Dad was doing to us. Priya sat with me in the hospital cafeteria, sorting through all of it. She made copies of everything and organized them into folders labeled Educational Competence, Pattern of Abuse, and Medical Evidence. She kept shaking her head at some of the messages, especially the ones where Adrian described being forced to throw up after eating normal meals. Or, Nolan talked about pretending he could not understand basic concepts around Dad. While we were working, the financial aid office called. The woman on the phone sounded confused when she explained that my funding had been frozen because Dad had contacted them and claimed I was mentally incompetent to manage money. Marisol met me there the next morning. We sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs while she filled out dependency override paperwork. She explained the situation to the financial aid director and showed him the police report from the dorm incident. He said it would take weeks to process, but promised to expedite it because of the circumstances. Dad started sending emails to my school account that afternoon. Long, rambling messages about how I was destroying the family ecosystem and how the dumb one accepting his place was essential for everyone's well-being. He wrote about how Nolan's intelligence would suffer without contrast. He wrote that Adrian's beauty meant nothing if everyone was equal. He wrote that Mara's strength came from protecting the weak one. Priya told me to save every single email, but not to respond. She said the messages were perfect evidence of Dad's abusive mindset and would help our case. I forwarded them all into a separate folder and tried not to read them too closely, because they made my hands shake. 3 days later, Dr. Adeyemi called with the blood test results. His voice was careful as he explained they had found traces of sedatives in my system, consistent with long-term exposure. Specifically, it was a type commonly used to treat severe anxiety. But in someone who did not need it, it could cause confusion and cognitive impairment. He ordered hair follicle testing that could show drug exposure going back months or even years. He said the evidence could be crucial for criminal charges against Dad for poisoning or assault. That same evening, Mara called me sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She kept saying she was sorry over and over before finally getting the words out. Dad was making her choose between helping him bring me home or letting him hurt Adrian and Nolan worse than ever before. Her voice cracked when she told me he had hired someone, some guy who found people who did not want to be found. That person was already tracking my location through my phone or my computer or something. I could hear Dad in the background telling her to stop being weak. "The strong one doesn't cry over necessary discipline," he said. Detective Salas scheduled a meeting for the next day to discuss getting a restraining order against Dad. She explained that between the assault attempt in my dorm, the stalking behavior, the tracker Mara had mentioned, and the documented pattern of abuse we were building, we should have enough for at least a temporary protective order. We met at the police station, where I filled out more forms describing every incident I could remember of Dad hurting me, threatening me, or controlling my life. 3 days later, we went to the courthouse for the temporary restraining order hearing. Of course, Dad showed up looking perfectly put together. Navy suit, hair combed back, calm, reasonable voice. He told the judge I was delusional and had always had mental problems that required constant supervision. But then the judge looked at the medical evidence Dr. Adeyemi had sent over. He read the emails Dad had sent me about the ecosystem. He saw the photos Officer Reyes had taken of the marks on my arms from the dorm incident. The judge's face got harder and harder. He granted a 2-week temporary restraining order and scheduled a hearing for a permanent one. He warned Dad that any contact with me would result in arrest. Dad started using other people to contact me within hours of leaving the courthouse. Cousins I had not heard from in years suddenly messaged me about how I was breaking Dad's heart. Old family friends called the dorm phone to tell me I was selfish and destroying my family. Priya documented every contact as a violation of the spirit, if not the exact letter, of the restraining order. She said it helped prove Dad could not respect boundaries even with legal consequences hanging over him. Then someone posted my dorm address online on a forum about problem children who abandoned their families. The post claimed I was a dangerous, mentally ill person who had left my poor father to deal with my siblings alone after years of sacrifice. Campus IT helped me document the doxing. They took screenshots and traced IP addresses. Security started doing extra patrols near my building and checking IDs of anyone who did not look like a student. The university issued an official no trespass order against Dad the next day. After the doxing incident, Officer Reyes personally drove out to the farmhouse to deliver it to Dad. He warned him that any appearance on campus would result in immediate arrest and prosecution for criminal trespass. 2 days later, I found a small package stuffed into my mailbox between bills and campus flyers. Inside was a thumb drive with a sticky note in Mara's handwriting. It said one word: evidence. I plugged it into my laptop and found scanned copies of all 4 of our birth certificates. My hand started shaking when I saw what Dad had written on each one. Right there in the official boxes for medical conditions, Dad had written our assigned roles in his perfect cursive handwriting. Nolan said, "Smart one, exceptional cognitive function." Adrian said, "Handsome one, aesthetic priority." Mara said, "Strong one, physical dominance required." Mine said, "Dumb one, severely limited capacity." He had literally put those labels on our legal documents like they were real medical diagnoses. Mara, dropping off that thumb drive, felt like finding the villain's diary with the words "evil plan" written across the cover. Dad had labeled his own children like produce at a grocery store. I printed copies and ran to Priya's office without even grabbing my coat. She took one look at the birth certificates, and her face went white. "This is premeditated abuse documented from birth," she said. "I've never seen anything this clear in 20 years of practice." She immediately made copies for our case file and said the birth certificates would become the centerpiece of our permanent restraining order hearing. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Adrian using our old code. When I translated it, my stomach dropped. He had fainted at the farmhouse, and Dad had to take him to urgent care. The doctor there noticed he was severely underweight and asked about his eating habits. Dad told the doctor Adrian was only stressed because his troubled brother had abandoned the family and was making false accusations. Adrian said the doctor looked suspicious, but did not push it because Dad was right there the whole time. I texted Adrian back and asked if he could get copies of those medical records. He was scared, but said he would try, because Dad's treatment was getting worse every day. Dad was making him weigh himself 3 times daily and cutting his food portions even smaller. The next morning, Detective Salas called with unexpected news. A neighbor near the farmhouse had seen news coverage about the investigation and contacted the police. The woman said she had heard strange screaming from our property for years. She had also noticed medical supply trucks making deliveries far too often for a normal family. She had always wondered what was happening, but Dad had told everyone we were homeschooled special needs children who required constant medical care. Salas added the neighbor's statement to the growing pile of evidence against Dad. Priya decided it was time to go after Dr. Halloran too. She filed a formal complaint with the state medical board about his involvement in Dad's lobotomy threats. Even if he had not actually done anything yet, planning a procedure like that on a healthy person would violate every medical ethics standard that existed. The board confirmed they would open an investigation and subpoena his patient records. 3 days later, Priya called with bad news. Dad had filed for emergency guardianship over me, claiming I was profoundly impaired and a danger to myself without constant supervision. The court scheduled an evaluation for the following week. Priya fought hard and got them to agree to use an independent evaluator instead of the doctor Dad wanted. She coached me on what to expect and told me to just be myself and answer honestly. The evaluation took place in a small office at the courthouse. The evaluator was a woman in her 50s who seemed kind but thorough. I spent 3 hours answering questions, doing basic cognitive tests, explaining my education history, and describing the abuse. She had me solve math problems. She had me read passages and explain them. She asked me to demonstrate that I understood abstract concepts. When I showed her my GED certificate and college acceptance letter, she looked shocked. "Your father claims you have the mental capacity of a young child," she said carefully. I showed her the birth certificate with Dad's handwriting, labeling me the dumb one from birth. The evaluator took detailed notes and said she would need time to review all the evidence before making her recommendation to the court. Meanwhile, Marisol had been working on getting me mental health support. She connected me with a support group for survivors of family abuse that met weekly on campus. There was a huge waiting list for individual therapy, but at least the group gave me somewhere to talk to people who understood. The first meeting was hard, but hearing other people's stories made me feel less alone and less crazy. One man there had escaped a similar situation where his parents assigned him the role of family failure. That night, Mara texted me something that made me cry. She had gone to a clinic and gotten x-rays of her joints. The images showed severe damage from being forced to lift heavy weights since she was 6 years old. Her knees, shoulders, and spine all showed signs of repetitive stress injuries that would probably need surgery eventually. She said seeing the damage in black and white was breaking through years of Dad's programming. She was finally getting angry at what he had done to her body in the name of making her the strong one. She was thinking about giving a statement to the police, but she was still scared about what would happen to Nolan if she turned against Dad completely. Detective Salas called me 2 days later about trying to get a search warrant for Dr. Halloran's office. She explained that the process was moving slowly because technically he had not done anything illegal yet. Being named in a threat as part of Dad's plan was not enough for most judges to approve a warrant. She needed more evidence of actual intent or preparation for the procedure Dad had threatened. I understood, but it frustrated me that we could not just stop him before something horrible happened. The whole legal system seemed designed to wait until after crimes were committed instead of preventing them. That same afternoon, I got back to my dorm after meeting with Priya and found something strange. A folded piece of paper had been pushed under my door while I was gone. My hands shook as I opened it. It said, "Dumb boys who run away get hurt." That was all, but I recognized Dad's handwriting. I recognized the way he made his letters. I called campus security immediately, and Officer Reyes came to collect the note as evidence. Security spent hours reviewing hallway camera footage, but whoever left it had avoided every camera. They knew exactly where the blind spots were. That meant they had been watching and planning. Reyes increased patrols near my building and suggested I vary my routes to class. The next morning, my backpack felt heavier than usual when I picked it up for class. I could not figure out why. I had not added any new books or supplies. I dumped everything onto my bed and started checking every pocket and compartment. That was when I found it sewn into the lining at the bottom. Someone had cut open the fabric, inserted a small GPS tracker, and sewn it back up. The stitching was neat and almost invisible, but I could feel the hard plastic device inside. Detective Salas came to collect it and said she would have it checked for fingerprints. She added stalking charges to the growing list of crimes we were building against Dad. The tracker looked expensive, and it had probably been transmitting my location for days. Later that week, I got some good news from the registrar's office. The university agreed to let me re-enroll provisionally for 2 classes while all the legal stuff got sorted out. It was not the full course load I wanted, but having any normal routine helped me feel more grounded. Taking Introduction to Psychology and English Composition proved I was capable of college work. My professors were understanding when Marisol explained my situation privately. They offered extensions on assignments when I had court dates or police meetings. Balancing coursework with everything else quickly became overwhelming. Some days I went straight from a police interview to class, then to a meeting with Priya. My brain felt pulled in too many directions, and I struggled to focus on homework. The support group helped me manage the stress, but I still felt like I was drowning sometimes. 3 weeks after the evaluation, we finally got the decision about Dad's emergency guardianship petition. The evaluator's report was clear and direct about my complete competence. The judge denied Dad's petition and seemed genuinely concerned by all the evidence we had presented. He scheduled a full hearing for a permanent restraining order and asked Detective Salas to keep investigating. Dad did not take the denial well, according to my siblings. That night, Nolan sent me a terrified text using our secret code. Dad had told him that if he testified against him, he would destroy Nolan's hands so he could never write or type again. Nolan was thinking about running away, but he did not know where to go or how to survive on his own. He had never been allowed to have a job or learn basic life skills. I immediately told Priya and Detective Salas about the threat to Nolan. They connected us with a social worker named Carmen Vale, who specialized in helping abuse victims escape safely. Carmen started working with my siblings to plan safe exits when they were ready. She gave them information about shelters and transportation resources through coded messages. The hard part was overcoming years of psychological control. Dad had convinced them they could not survive without him, even while he was destroying them. 2 days later, I got a call that made me cry with relief and worry at the same time. Adrian had finally escaped to a shelter after Dad discovered he had been secretly talking to me. Dad found Adrian's hidden phone and started screaming about betrayal and breaking the ecosystem. While Dad was busy destroying the phone, Adrian grabbed a bag of clothes and ran out. He called me from the shelter crying, but for the first time in years, he also sounded relieved. He said he could not take the forced starvation anymore. He had finally chosen his life over Dad's approval. The shelter kept his location secret and helped him get medical attention for the damage caused by years of malnutrition. Within hours, Dad called the police to report Adrian as a kidnapped runaway. He claimed I had brainwashed Adrian and forced him to leave home against his will. Detective Salas quickly confirmed with the shelter that Adrian was an adult and had left voluntarily. The false report became another mark in the pattern of harassment and control Dad kept displaying. Salas said every lie Dad told authorities only made our case stronger. Dad was destroying his own credibility with every desperate attempt to regain control. Meanwhile, Adrian was finally eating regular meals without someone monitoring every bite. He told me the shelter staff were shocked by how underweight he was for his height. They connected him with doctors who specialized in helping people recover from eating disorders. Adrian said it felt strange to eat without guilt, but he was determined to get healthy. He wanted to be strong enough to testify about what Dad had done to all of us. The next morning, Priya started putting together a civil harassment claim based on everything Dad had been doing online. She pulled up screenshots of the posts claiming I was mentally ill and dangerous. She documented every fake account Dad had made to spread lies about me. She tracked down the original doxing post with my dorm address. She spread papers across her desk, showing how Dad had posted on parent forums, saying I was a runaway with severe brain damage who needed to be returned home for medical care. He had created fake missing person flyers with my photo, claiming I had the mental capacity of a 5-year-old. He had even made a website called Help Bring Eli Home, full of fabricated stories about my supposed disabilities. Priya explained that having both criminal and civil cases would create multiple ways to stop Dad's behavior, because different courts could issue different kinds of orders with different penalties. While she worked on that, Dr. Adeyemi called with the hair analysis results. I could hear the shock in his voice. The test showed I had been exposed to sedatives consistently for at least 4 years, at levels that suggested someone had been deliberately drugging me rather than providing any kind of legitimate medical treatment. The concentration patterns in different sections of my hair created a timeline. The drugging had started around the time I turned 14 and continued right up until I escaped to college. The highest levels were during the past year, when Dad must have increased the doses to keep me confused as I got older. Dr. Adeyemi said he had never seen anything like it outside of criminal poisoning cases. He was preparing a detailed report that would strengthen any criminal charges against Dad significantly. That same afternoon, a letter arrived from Dr. Halloran's office. It claimed they had no record of any planned procedures for me and denied any discussions with my father about medical interventions. But Priya noticed the careful wording. The letter avoided actually saying he had never talked to Dad at all. It kept using phrases like no formal consultations and no scheduled appointments. That sounded like legal protection, not an actual denial. It mentioned their office's commitment to appropriate medical ethics 3 separate times, which Priya said showed consciousness of guilt. Detective Salas came up with an idea to get more evidence. She had me call Dr. Halloran's office while she recorded everything. She coached me to ask general questions about whether they ever did house calls or private procedures. Dr. Halloran himself got on the phone. He did not admit to anything specific about me, but he said his practice sometimes handled difficult cases, requiring discretion and private procedures for families with special circumstances. Salas said that was enough to investigate his medical license and subpoena his records. A few days after that recorded call, Adrian managed to get copies of urgent care records. He emailed them to me from a library computer, while Dad thought he was at a grooming appointment. The documents listed Adrian as severely underweight for his height, and noted the doctor's concern about possible malnutrition. They also recorded Dad's explanation that Adrian had developed an eating problem because of stress over his troubled brother abandoning the family. Priya said it was perfect, because the records proved Adrian's condition was real, while exposing the exact lie Dad used to explain it away. She added them to the medical evidence folder and forwarded a copy to Detective Salas. That same week, the medical board sent Priya a letter confirming they had formally opened their investigation into Dr. Halloran and requested his complete patient files going back 10 years. Priya explained that once a licensing board started pulling records, doctors usually started talking to protect themselves. Halloran might end up becoming our best witness against Dad without ever meaning to. I started sleeping a little better, knowing the people who could have hurt us were finally the ones being watched. 2 days later, Mara called me crying because she had torn something in her knee during one of Dad's forced training sessions. He had made her carry 200 pounds up and down the stairs for 3 hours straight. The doctor at urgent care said she needed surgery and would be on crutches for at least 2 months. That meant she physically could not do the insane strength exercises Dad demanded anymore. She told me the injury was almost a relief because it gave her an excuse to stop being Dad's enforcer while she figured out how to get away. I could hear the pain in her voice, from both the fresh injury and years of joint damage. Carmen had been working with her to arrange transportation to a shelter whenever she was ready. There was a whole escape plan. A volunteer would pick Mara up during one of her physical therapy appointments, so Dad would not know she was gone until hours later. But Mara kept hesitating. She was terrified about what Dad might do to Nolan if she and Adrian were both gone. She kept saying she could not abandon our brother to face Dad's rage alone. Even though staying was destroying her body, she had been the enforcer for so long that the guilt of leaving Nolan unprotected was eating her alive. Carmen had to keep reminding her that she could not protect anyone if Dad completely destroyed her ability to walk. A week later, I was walking to class when I noticed someone in a big coat and sunglasses following me across campus. The disguise included a hat and different clothes, but I recognized Dad's walk instantly. I had spent years watching the way he moved, so I could predict his moods. I texted Officer Reyes immediately and kept walking toward the campus security office. Dad got closer behind me. His hand reached into his bag for something I could not see. Reyes intercepted him right outside the library. Dad tried to claim he was only a concerned parent checking on his son, but Reyes reminded him about the no trespass order and called for backup. Watching Reyes put handcuffs on Dad, while Dad screamed about his parental rights, felt like something out of a dream. After all those years of Dad having complete control over every part of our lives, someone else was finally telling him no. Dad was charged with criminal trespass and violating a restraining order. The prosecutor said the arrest would help our case significantly because it showed Dad could not respect legal boundaries. 3 weeks later, at the permanent restraining order hearing, the neighbor from near the farmhouse testified. She talked about hearing screaming at all hours. She talked about seeing medical supply trucks making deliveries that seemed excessive for a regular family. She described finding me once when I was 15, stumbling around confused in her yard because the pills Dad gave me had made me so dizzy I got lost. She said Dad had dragged me home while telling her I was severely disabled and prone to wandering. Combined with all our other evidence, including the birth certificates with our assigned roles, the drugging evidence, and Dad's repeated violations, the testimony made the judge look more and more disturbed as the hearing went on. The judge granted a 3-year restraining order with strict terms. Dad could not contact us directly or through third parties. He could not come within 500 feet of us. He could not post about us online. Dad's lawyer argued that the order was excessive for a father who was only trying to help his children. The judge said the pattern of abuse and recent violations showed a serious ongoing threat that required maximum protection. Within days, Dad filed a defamation lawsuit claiming I was lying about everything and destroying his reputation with false allegations of abuse. He demanded damages for emotional distress and insisted I publicly recant my delusions about being drugged and controlled. Priya laughed when she saw the lawsuit. Then she immediately started preparing an anti-slap motion to get it dismissed. She explained that this kind of retaliation was common from abusers trying to silence their victims through legal intimidation. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed when the judge ruled on Priya's anti-slap motion. I watched Dad's face turn red as the judge said, "The lawsuit was clearly meant to silence me from speaking about my own abuse experiences." The judge ordered Dad to pay all my legal fees within 30 days and warned that any future lawsuits would be treated as harassment. Dad's lawyer tried to argue that this was about protecting a father's reputation, but the judge was not buying it. Outside the courtroom, Priya told me the civil harassment case was moving forward separately. She had already gotten a hold placed on Dad's assets, so he could not quietly move money around before we collected the fees. She said abusers like him counted on victims running out of energy before the system ran out of patience. The best thing we could do was refuse to disappear. For the first time, I started to believe we might actually outlast him. Detective Salas called me that same afternoon. She finally had approval for the search warrant based on everything we had given her, plus the neighbor's testimony and new information from other families who had dealt with Dr. Halloran. She warned me they would be searching the farmhouse the next morning for medical supplies, drugs that were not prescribed to anyone, and any documentation of Dad's ecosystem system. She asked if there was anything specific they should look for. I told her about the filing cabinet in Dad's bedroom, where he kept development charts tracking how well we stayed in our assigned roles. I told her about the locked box under his bed, where he stored the pills he made me take. The search team found more than even I expected. They found detailed notebooks dating back to our births, where Dad had written daily observations about how to keep us in our roles. They found bottles of prescription sedatives with no patient names. They found 17 different tracking devices he had been planning to use on us. They also found printed emails between Dad and Dr. Halloran discussing cognitive adjustment procedures for problem children. They found receipts for medical equipment that had no legitimate use in a regular home. The evidence room photos Detective Salas showed me later made my stomach turn. Seeing it all laid out on tables with evidence tags, especially the syringes and vials Dad had been collecting for whatever he planned next, made everything feel even more real. Days later, Detective Salas let me look through copies of the development charts. Reading them was worse than anything I had imagined. Dad had kept a separate file for each of us. Each file had columns tracking height, weight, grades, and what he called roll deviation incidents. He marked those incidents in red ink whenever one of us showed a talent that did not match our label. My file went back to when I was 4 years old. One entry read, "Subject demonstrated unauthorized reading ability. Corrective measures applied." Next to it, Dad had written the dose of the pills he had started giving me and a note to increase it if the behavior continued. There were charts for Nolan logging every time he hit a book. There were charts for Adrian listing his weight to the ounce. There were charts for Mara recording how much she could lift each month, like she was livestock being raised for a purpose. Sala said the notebooks alone were enough to prove Dad had planned and adjusted the abuse with the cold precision of a science experiment for our entire lives. I asked if I could have a copy of my own chart. When she asked why, I told her I wanted to remember that none of it had ever been about me being slow. It had been about him being afraid of what I might become. Within hours of the search, Dad was arrested at his motel for assault, stalking, and child endangerment based on what they found. Detective Salas said, "Dr. Halloran was also under investigation after they discovered he had been doing special procedures on other families too. Dad's mugshot showed him still trying to look composed, but you could see the rage in his eyes. His perfect system was finally being exposed to everyone. The day after the arrest, the prosecutor's office called and told me they were taking the case to a grand jury. They expected to add charges for each of my siblings once their statements were processed. Detective Salas said 2 of the other families who dealt with Dr. Halloran had agreed to cooperate. One of them had a child. Dad's notebooks actually referenced by name, which suggested Dad and Halloran had been comparing methods like colleagues. The thought that there were other parents out there running their own versions of the ecosystem made me feel sick. But Priya said our case had become the threat that pulled the whole thing apart. News crews started parking outside the courthouse. A reporter asked me for a comment as I left one of the hearings, but I kept walking, just like Priya told me to. That night, 3 people from the support group messaged me to say they had seen the story. They told me that watching someone actually win against a parent like that gave them hope they had not felt in years. Mara was brought in for questioning the next day about her role in bringing me back from campus. I felt sick knowing she might get in trouble for something Dad had forced her to do. The detective who interviewed her called me afterward and said they were not pressing charges. It was clear Mara was also a victim who had been threatened and manipulated. Hearing that seemed to help Mara finally start accepting that what Dad did to all of us was abuse. Adrian went to the police station that week and gave a sworn statement about the diet pills and forced starvation. He showed them photos from when he was at his thinnest and medical records from multiple fainting episodes Dad had ignored. Nolan sent in a written declaration with photos of his burned paintings, detailed descriptions of the punishments he received for showing artistic talent, and witness statements from 2 former neighbors who had seen the smoke when Dad burned his art. Their courage made the case so much stronger, the prosecutor said. Having all 4 siblings confirm the abuse pattern made it nearly impossible for Dad to claim this was just one troubled child making things up. Dad posted bail 3 days later. He immediately started showing up at the courthouse during my hearings for the restraining order appeals, standing exactly 501 feet away. Technically, that was outside the order. But everyone knew it was meant to scare me. Each time he appeared, campus security or court officers documented it with photos and measurements. Every appearance became more evidence that he could not respect boundaries, even while facing serious criminal charges. Once the immediate danger passed, the trauma started hitting me hard. I jumped whenever someone walked behind me. I could not sleep because every sound made me think Dad had found a way around the restraining order. I would wake up at 3 in the morning in a full panic, thinking I heard his voice or smelled the medicine from the pills he used to force down my throat, even though I logically knew he could not get near me. Marisol helped me get on the waiting list for trauma therapy through the University Counseling Center, but they said it could be weeks before a spot opened up because so many students needed help. She also connected me with an online support group for family abuse survivors, which helped because other people understood what it was like to be afraid of your own father. Prosecutor Hollis Grant called a meeting with me and Priya to discuss a plea deal he was considering offering Dad. Dad would plead guilty to assault and stalking in exchange for dropping the more serious charges. The prosecutor explained that trials are hard on victims. We would have to testify and relive everything in detail. This deal would guarantee Dad got probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment, plus a no-contact order covering all of us. The terms included 3 years of probation, where any violation would mean immediate jail time. He would have mandatory therapy twice a week, which he had to pay for himself. There would also be a 10-year restraining order covering all 4 of us, with no exceptions for holidays or family events. Finding out how many medical supply trucks had made regular deliveries to a normal house made me wonder how many people noticed something was wrong, but never asked what was happening inside that farmhouse. I called my siblings that night, and we talked for hours about whether to support the plea deal. Mara said she just wanted it over. Adrian worried Dad would find a way around any restrictions. Nolan thought therapy might actually help Dad understand what he had done to us. In the end, we agreed that our safety mattered more than seeing Dad get the maximum punishment. A guaranteed outcome was better than risking a trial where something could go wrong. 2 days later, all of us sent letters to the prosecutor saying we supported the plea deal. Dad pleaded guilty in court to assault and stalking. The judge made sure he understood he was agreeing to stay away from all of us for a decade. The news about Dr. Halloran came through Detective Salas. She called to tell me that after our case made the local news, 3 other families contacted the medical board about him. They said he had suggested strange treatments for their children that were not normal medical procedures. The board suspended his license immediately while they investigated. Salas said he would probably never practice medicine again. That meant Dad had lost the main medical person who would have actually done the horrible things he threatened. The registrar reinstated my full financial aid the same week the dependency override cleared. I registered for a complete course load, signing my own name on every form without a single person standing above me to approve it. Walking to my morning English class that first day, I realized I was not checking behind me every few steps. I was not planning escape routes in case Dad showed up. The sun felt warm on my face. Other students rushed past me to get to their classes. I was just another college kid heading somewhere to learn something new. I sat in the front row and raised my hand to answer a question about the reading without worrying that being smart would get me hurt. The professor smiled when I gave my answer and said I had made an excellent point. At home, that would have earned me a beating. Here, it only meant I understood the material. The dumb one was sitting in the front row of a university lecture, getting it right, going by a name instead of a label, with a future the man who raised me swore I would never be allowed to have.